Welcome, everybody, to day 3 of our TSCPA Forensic Valuation Conference. And our first session today is a panel, as you guys can see, probably heard, about professional practices and the topic really of personal goodwill as it relates to valuations in divorces of professionals. And our panel is Kurt Myers, Rob Vance, and Miles Mason. And I know most of you know these guys. Each of these 3 individuals have their own practices, do a lot of, Rob and Kurt do a lot of divorce valuation and testimony in court and divorce court. Miles is a closet CPA, so he's sort of in our club too, but is also a divorce attorney in Memphis, widely known. And we hope to give you some perspectives today on some of the cases in Tennessee, as well as from different perspectives from Kurt and Rob on some of the differing opinions that are out there in Tennessee, as well as in the regions, and then talk about one of the most recent decision cases that came out recently, the Lunn case. And Miles, from his perspective of not only from what he sees in court, but also from a legal perspective of how we can do a better job, if you will, of working with counsel and presenting our case and our arguments, not advocacy arguments, of course, but our to defend our work and make our opinions better presented and understood. The first thing that we're going to do is go through a few of the most recent opinions, and let's just go ahead and start, if I can find my list here that I made, with I'll let Rob start with the Lunn case, and if I have to cut him off, y'all just forgive me. But
Don't get me
I was going to make the joke that all I'm doing is directed traffic, because I'll just have to cut you guys off anyway. But
if you're going to start with Lunn, Rob may take the entire period.
Well, maybe. Well, I know that's why I prefaced it, but it's important because it obviously keeps coming up briefly right now, just to sort of describe what's going on here. And anyway, so Kurt and Rob, if you'll take a stab at just talking briefly about each one of these cases to set up what we're really talking about here, and Miles, as you want to interject. So things get rowdy, I'll just raise my hand, but you guys can go ahead and start.
Well, so I guess since you called on me first, I guess I'll start off.
Well, cut you off though, so be careful.
Well, just as an overview, I know enough about the law to be dangerous. So I've become sort of a student of the case law in Tennessee. And, we had 3 grand divisions in Tennessee: Western, Middle, and Eastern. And the Eastern section, where Lunn was decided, it was a case out of Chattanooga. I testified in Hamilton County in that case. And the Eastern section, well, let me give you the background on it. Lunn was a dentist, sole proprietor. Started his practice from scratch, had a very successful practice, had a number of hygienists that worked for him, didn't have any dentists that worked for him though. And so I valued the practice using the capitalization of earnings method, which I think is proper, and also bringing in some market comps, which I think is also proper. And of course, any income approach or market approach is going to have goodwill in it. It's just inherently the end result's going to have goodwill in it versus net asset value, which is not going to have the goodwill in it. So the trial judge thought I was a little high. That's fine, but Lunn himself, he had valued the business at a certain value, and so the judge said, "Okay, we're going to go." He put it in a personal financial statement, and by the way, this is tip number 1. You're working in a divorce case, be sure and tell your lawyer, subpoena the bank files. Okay, get the loan file, get the loan jacket, get any and all personal financial statements you can get, because once an individual puts the value of a business on a personal financial statement under penalties of bank fraud, federal and state, they can and will be held to that value. And so the judge said, "Okay, Vance is a little high, the other guy's low, so we're going to go with this middle value that he put on the financial statement." That's what the chancellor did. So it goes up to the appellate court. The appellate court said, "Sorry, we just recently had decided the Heartline case, who was a sole proprietor dentist in Cleveland, Tennessee, Eastern Section. So they said, well, because of Heartline and because we have to value Lunn at the net asset value, or we can't value with any goodwill at all, because that's how we did Heartline. Well, Heartline was a little country dentist, had, I think, 3 employees. I've seen his website. He's still in business. He's got a little office in Cleveland, nothing like what Lunn was. Lunn had started to brand himself Chattanooga Family Dentistry or something along those lines. Had a great location, high traffic's on Gun Barrel Road. If anybody from Chattanooga area knows, that's near the Hamilton Place Mall. I mean, it's, location, and he had a lot of, in my opinion, definitely had a lot of goodwill. But they said, but because we had just decided Heartline, we're going to have to default to Heartline. Well, I disagree, of course, with both of these. And you can't tell me that a dentist cannot, the basic premise of the 2 cases was because you're a sole proprietor, you cannot sell your business. You cannot sell your practice, which is nonsense. Okay. And I say this in court all the time. I have a relative that was a dentist for 40 years in Chattanooga. Okay. He retired, sold his practice for $250,000. About 25 or 30 of that was equipment. What do you think the rest of it was? Okay. Patient files, patient relationship, recurring revenue, goodwill. Okay. He sold goodwill. That's my rant for the day. And I keep hearing Lunn. It's Lunn all the time. Okay. Sole proprietor, don't tell me a sole proprietor can't sell their business. Thank you. I'm going.
No, Rob, and I'm just going to add a little bit to that, is that it's something we have to deal with, even if we think the courts are wrong in the emphasis on the sole proprietor part, because that could almost be taken to other types of businesses that are not professional practices. If they're going to say, well, it's a sole proprietor, so it can't have any goodwill. And that doesn't really make any difference. What makes a difference in whether there is, I'll just say business goodwill as opposed to the personal goodwill is, a lot of the attributes and characteristics and, all those kind of things, corporate name, a brand, charts, recurring revenue, all those kind of things. Other people generating revenue. There's a lot of different things to take into account. And for me, being a sole proprietor doesn't really come into play. However, that being said, we also know that you at least need to consider it. Or if you have a sole proprietor that you're going to include some goodwill, you better address why being a sole proprietor doesn't make that much of a difference, because we do have cases that kind of rely on that.
Miles, you got anything you want to add to that?
From the perspective of your jurist, remember almost all of them left a practice to go to the bench. And if any of them have any business sense at all, they've tried to figure out how do they continue to make money off their practice while still a judge. I'm not saying it's ethical. I'm just saying they thought about it. And the reason why they have this perspective is because they can't sell it. And the reason they can't sell it is because lawyers can't do non-competes, because the underlying theory is that clients have the ultimate choice. Now, that goes back to Rob's idea in terms of the value of the file, the medical records. Lawyers' files have some value, especially if you're a estate and trust lawyer, because you got the wills, you got that tie that you need them back. And plus, estate lawyers are not as prevalent as other type of lawyers, or of course real estate agents or financial advisors. So when you go into a concept about sales of sole proprietors and proprietorships, couple of tips. Number one, yes, always above all. I think Rob and I coined the phrase holy grail of the personal financial statement. Okay. Now, Rob kind of glossed over that topic, but it's terribly important. And if you haven't read Rob's Powell case in a few years, or the Trezevant case in terms of the power of personal financial statements and whether you need a separate appraisal or not, I highly encourage you to do so. That being said, one of the things I've got to share with you is that there is a concept that you have to get comfortable with as you become more experienced testifying. Think of a grid. Do you want to be right in terms of business law theory, or do you care? And then second, what are you willing to say to win the case? All right. And we'll talk about this, the development of the relationship between the attorney and expert in terms of how do you build the framework to win. And what you're going to hear from me today more often than not is the law is your friend regardless of which side you're on. Okay? Because if the Tennessee law is wrong, and this is a great example, sole proprietorships don't have goodwill that's able to be sold. You get to argue business. Everybody on the planet agrees that that's a wrong statement. So when Rob's in court and says that's wrong, in that context of general theory, he could say, that's not my idea. That's everybody in the entire industry, because that makes no economic sense. But from an advocacy standpoint, he could also come back and say, I know this is what the general law is. I've explained to you what general theory is, according to almost everybody who's ever written on the topic. But this is an exception. Okay? And that, there are a number of things we're going to talk about that is important if you have to go against the grain. Now, when I say go against the grain, what I'm talking about is arguing against Tennessee case law that your opponent is going to be citing for whatever reason, logically or illogically. You can either be right while you're arguing against the grain from a theory standpoint, or you're traveling in some kind of exception because of this particular professional practice. And how is it different from everything else? I am intimately aware of that because my practice is different from a business perspective than almost all family lawyers in Tennessee. And that's due to intellectual property. Okay. I've been published a ton. Now, whether you like it or not, that's a different topic. But it does create a separate set of assets that generate income separate from me that makes the phone ring. And then the last concept I would share with you is what's the driver of the business? All right. So in the Chattanooga dentist case, Rob mentioned location. Is that transferable? Yeah. Who else has dental chairs on Gunpowder Road? Probably not that many people because they paid the price to put those chairs there. And it's not really the chairs, it's the signage. Okay. Can that be transferred? Absolutely.
Website.
The name on the door. Nice and generic, easily transferable. obviously thoughtful by the dentist himself. But the other thing, don't forget about industry experts. All right. Rob and I worked on a case 15 years ago where we were hoping to bring in addition to Rob's testimony, if we face that exact problem that we're talking about, bring in an industry expert who does sell the practices and takes a cut. Because when you sell a dental practice, it's most likely going to be, Rob, would you agree with this? 80% chance that it's the same group out of Texas? You know, there's a group that dominates.
You mean the ones from the McKee case? Yeah.
Yeah. But they could be your friends as well, depending on which side of the issue you're on. Okay. And if you need an expert to say there's not much value there, and it's really low for whatever, have your business valuation broker come in and say, here are the 10 things I need you to do in order to make it marketable. And that's really what the value of the relationship with those guys is. They know how to pump up the value before sale. And that's what they do. They charge outrageous sums of money to dentists to get their practices ready for sale by the time they're retired, and help with management and accounting and all those other good things. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to be discussing how to be outcome oriented during this process.